Good morning, everyone. Today is Saturday, July 18th. Sorry for the late posting. Had just a little later start to the day than I usually do. We're going to see if we can get through this without rain pouring down. As you can hear, the thunder rolling in as the storms we're going to be having here in the Midwest. My name is Karen Bodenschatz, and I serve as Associate Pastor at First Lutheran Church in Onalaska, Wisconsin, and you have found your way to our morning musings. So tomorrow, we're going to be hearing another parable from Matthew 13, another parable about wheat and agriculture. So you'll hear it read and then preached on. This parable is the parable of the wheat and the weeds. Where Jesus talks about a sower sows wheat a little bit more carefully than last week, and then overnight the evil one comes and sows weeds within the wheat, and the workers of the farm say, "What do we do?" And the sower says, "We do nothing. It grows up with the weeds and the wheat together, because if you try to pull out the weeds now, it'll kill the wheat." And so at the very end of this parable, when the disciples asked Jesus to interpret that for them, that parable, he talks about the weeds, the evil people being thrown into the fire of eternal damnation. And that is usually where we get stuck in this parable, but that's not what this parable is really about. And we either go one of two ways. We're either afraid that we are somehow the weeds, or we begin to try to figure out who is the weeds and make sure that they know they should become wheat so they don't go to hell. Neither one of those ways is a correct interpretation of this particular parable. And one of the gifts that the Revised Common Lectionary is for us is that it pairs these gospel texts with three other readings. We as Lutherans, and I would say most of mainline denominations, believe that Scripture interprets Scripture. So we don't just take this particular Scripture text and don't look at anything else and try to interpret it. We in fact look at the whole of Scripture to help us interpret smaller Scriptures. So the lectionary helps us do that along the way. So the New Testament reading, also assigned for tomorrow, which you won't hear read, is from Romans 8, verses 12 through 25. And one of the things that I thought of as, there were two things that popped out at me this morning as I was reading and had some impact on this parable that we hear from Jesus's. And the first is that Paul says, "You did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption." So if we just stick to those last verses of the Matthew text, that we're afraid we're weeds and we are going to go to hell, which is not what Lutherans believe at all, then we need to remember that we did not receive a spirit of slavery. See? Could not be more perfectly timed. Right? We did not receive a spirit of slavery, but in fact, a spirit of adoption, of belonging. We did not receive a spirit of fear, that we would just fall back into fear instead of in the knowledge that we are indeed God's children. And then Paul follows that very sentence up with this sentence, which, I've read this text a lot, but I had never heard this particular verse. It didn't register with me. He says, "When we cry, 'Abba, Father,' that is the Spirit bearing witness to our spirit that we are children of God." So when we cry out to God, when we are in fear, when we fall back into that fear, when we don't know what's going on, that very crying out to God is the Spirit reminding us that we are God's children. reminding us that we have that spirit of adoption, which I'm still chewing on, but I'm like, whoa. When I cry out to God for help, especially in those times when I'm afraid, that is the Spirit of God reminding me whose I am. That I am God's child, in God's care, in God's love, and in God's mercy. That's going to be rolling around in my heart and soul for the rest of the day, perhaps the rest of the week, hopefully the rest of my life. So, as we get ready for worship tomorrow, I encourage you to read Matthew 13, 24 through 43, and Romans 8, 12 through 25. Read these two texts together. See what the Spirit does in your heart and your mind with these two texts as you prepare to hear this preacher preach tomorrow. And then if you want the whole thing, what the Revised Common Lectionary encourages us to read, you can read Isaiah 44, 6 through 8, and Psalm 86, 11 through 17. I hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy, those of you in the Midwest, this lovely stormy day. Snuggle down, watch some movies, eat some popcorn, do some art projects, and we will see you tomorrow.